Welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We are having our second class now on the words of my perfect teacher by Patrul Rinpoche. Is this our second? Yeah. And Michael is going to lead off. Sir.
So welcome everyone. The index, the table of contents in the book really provides a pretty good outline of what we're going to be covering tonight and through the rest of this book. So it's helpful to refer back to. All of the first part one, the first half of this book relates to the outer preliminaries, or what are sometimes called the common preliminaries. And in chapter one, there are two parts to chapter one. The second part, which John will talk about, relates to the four reminders. But the first part talks about how to relate to the teachings, how to listen to the teachings altogether. And in thinking about this first part of the book, it's helpful to remember something from the introduction that we talked about last week, where it said that Patrul Rinpoche, our author, was in great agreement with Atisha, who is the person who taught the Lojong slogans, that the best spiritual friend is the one who attacks your hidden faults. And so it's, I think as we go through, especially the first piece of this book, it's interesting to just see what might become more obvious to us in terms of our hidden faults, or maybe not so hidden faults, in terms of how we approach the Dharma, how we approach the teacher, and how we approach the teachings. And the idea of this is not to make us feel guilty. That's a particularly unhelpful way to relate to it, but more to sharpen our awareness, help us to recognize what's in our mind in terms of how we approach the Dharma, and what might get in the way, and what might be helpful to being able to relate to the Dharma in a way that's particularly effective or transformative. As it says in one part of chapter one, we want to rid ourselves of every wrong thought concerning the teacher and the Dharma. So what we're meant to do is contemplate these things, see what might be true of us, and think about the greater context in which we could approach the teachings. The point is not to settle into some kind of fixed self-judgment, which is not helpful, but more to look at how we are in the present moment. How are we feeling now? What are we experiencing now? What's in our mind? What's in our approach that may or may not be helpful or detrimental to our study and our practice of Dharma? So again, the overall idea is, what can we do in the present moment to make the Dharma and our practice effective and transformative for us? So chapter one, again, is the overall title for chapter one is The Difficulty of Finding the Freedoms and Advantages. And the freedoms and advantages really relate to the second part of the chapter, where we talk about the four reminders, precious human birth, and so on. But the first thing is that Patrul Rinpoche presents to us is the proper way to listen to the spiritual teachings. And with this, he says there are two aspects. The first is our attitude, and then secondly, our conduct, how we actually comport ourselves in body, speech, and mind. So the attitude that we could listen to the teachings with is a particularly Mahayana motivation, the attitude of bodhicitta, that whatever contemplation we might do, that we get to the point where we make the determination that we are studying and practicing the Dharma in order to benefit sentient beings, that it's not simply to some type of self-aggrandizement or something that we do just simply for ourselves, but that we're practicing, studying for the benefit of all sentient beings, to help all sentient beings. The contemplation that Patrul Rinpoche begins with is the notion that all beings have been our parents, which is what the Buddha taught. It is what bodhisattvas and great teachers teach, that in beginningless time, since beginningless time, at some time or another, every being has been our parent. And that at some point in some lifetime that every being has taken care of us, nurtured us, protected us, and that just as we have to all sentient beings as well. If that doesn't work for you, because it's not immediately visible, although the teachings say that it's true, we could at least think about the equality of all beings. This begins with recognizing that for ourselves that we don't wish to suffer and that we wish to be happy. And we realize that this is how all beings are, that all beings wish to be happy, all beings wish not to be free of suffering. And that we could expand our sense of compassion to all beings at some point, and that this is Mahayana practice, that begin with the idea that we ourselves don't want to suffer, we ourselves want to be happy, and that this allows us to make this connection to all beings, that all beings feel this way. Ordinarily, we feel that way toward some beings, the beings that we're closest to as friends or family. But the idea of the Mahayana is, in fact, we can expand beyond that, that we don't need to be limited at all in our compassion, that it can actually grow and extend to all beings. But in any case, that's the motivation with which we should, that it's recommended that we practice, that we begin by generating some feeling of bodhicitta. And we, again, in looking at other beings, we realize, as Patrul says, that although no one wants to suffer, so many beings don't know how to free themselves of negative actions, don't know how to work with their minds. And so that even though they wish to be happy, their behavior, the way that people conduct themselves, is in opposition to that. The beings are lost in confusion. Lost and confused, and for that reason we develop great compassion. And so we tell ourselves, as he says, it is for their well-being that I am going to listen to the Dharma and put it into practice. It is for their well-being that I'm going to listen to the Dharma and put it into practice. When we practice in the morning, we say something quite similar when we repeat 3 times, in order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood. From my heart, I take refuge in the 3 jewels. And the point here would be not just to say it, but to actually feel it, make some connection with that, this desire to practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. And with that, Patrul Rinpoche says that in fact there are 3 supreme methods for practice. The first is arousing bodhicitta, which we just talked about. The second is to avoid getting involved in any conceptualization, which we certainly work with, try to understand in terms of meditation practice, where we talk about simply being present and letting go of effort, expectation, and just simply being able to rest in awareness, wakefulness. And then at the end of practice, that we dedicate the merit, that we dedicate the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings. And he says that the way we listen to the Dharma is very important, but even more important is the motivation with which we listen to it, the way we listen to the Dharma. And one reason for this, among many, is that this attitude of bodhicitta corrects, dispels self-fixation and self-aggrandizement, so that our practice is that much more effective because it isn't limited so much in an ego-centered way. He goes on to talk about a vast skill and means, the attitude of the secret mantrayana or vajrayana. And this is a little trickier to explain, but I'll do my best. Actually, I want to start with something that's said there kind of toward the end, where there's a quote from the Hevajra Tantra, that all beings are Buddhas, but this is concealed by adventitious stains. When their stains are purified, their Buddhahood is revealed. So when it says adventitious, what it means is that the stains are not inherent in who we are, that they are like mud covering gold or like dust covering a jewel, but they're not inherent in our Buddha nature. And that for that reason, we're capable of removing them, seeing through them, transforming, relinquishing, whatever words we use. And there are different methods in the different jhanas for doing that. But that our fundamental nature is Buddha, and that we could actually see each other that way. So the attitude of the secret mantrayana or vajrayana And this would particularly apply in situations such as an abhisheka or an empowerment or a vow ceremony, although we really could experience this all the time. He talks here about the importance of aspiration, but it's the five perfections that that it goes beyond ordinary or impure. That, in other words, that we actually could relate to ourselves, relate to the world, relate to all beings from the point of view of sacred outlook and sacred world. And with that, we have the perfect place, which is, he describes as perhaps a pure land or the palace of a deity. The perfect teacher, which relates to samantabhadra, primordial purity, or seeing the teacher as Buddha, just as we could see each other as Buddha. The perfect assembly of bodhisattvas and deities, and the perfect teaching of the Dharma in perfect time. And he says that the point of these visualizations, the point of seeing things in this way, is to help us understand how things are in reality. This is very much a Vajrayana point of view. This is very much how visualization practice works. That it's not that we're creating something that doesn't really exist, but that we're actually seeing things in a greater reality, a perfectly pure reality, where beyond the adventitious stains, beyond confusion. As it says in the footnote, and by the way, I'd echo John's advice. It's really a good idea to read this text with 2 bookmarks so that you can read the text and then find the appropriate footnotes, because some of them are very clear explanations of particular points. That the point of the visualizing in this way isn't to see something in a way that it's not, that we're not trying to see a donkey as a horse or coal as gold, but more to just have that sense of realization. And again, I think it really comes back to that quote from the Hivajra Tantra: all beings are Buddhas, but that's concealed by adventitious stains. When their stains are purified, their Buddhahood is revealed. And again, this is really a Vajrayana way of listening to the teachings with complete appreciation, complete openness, and a complete connection to our fundamental inherent purity, or the true nature of our mind. So with that attitude, at least an attitude of bodhicitta, if not attitude of primordial purity, the next section relates to conduct, what to avoid and what to do. And there are different analogies and metaphors that are used here. The first 3, I think, are perhaps familiar, but it's the 3 defects of the pot. So the first one is a pot that's upside down so that nothing goes into it. And this is a metaphor for not listening to the Dharma at all. So this doesn't mean simply rejecting Dharma, although it does include that, but it's any circumstance in which we're not present, where we're distracted, where we're speedy, where we give in to some kind of, any kind of arrogance. I know this, I've heard this before. Or even any kind of self-deprecation. I can't understand this. I'm not smart enough. I can't ever get this. Anything like that would be a manifestation of upside down pot. And again, the point is that any of these metaphors and examples and similes in this section, the point isn't that they're any kind of permanent fixed state that we are. It's again, looking at how we are right now. Are we an upside down pot right now? Are we a pot with a hole in it right now, so that we're not really taking things in, making an effort to remember, not making an effort to bring it to mind, not making an effort to see how what's described by the teachings and the teacher, how that applies to our life. So if we don't really engage with Dharma teachings, if we don't try to put them into some kind of contemplation or practice, then we're like a pot with a hole in it. We take it in, but we don't really take it in, and then we forget it. And then the third is a pot containing poison. And this is, as Pakul Rinpoche says, any type of situation where we listen with the wrong attitude, such as the desire to be great or famous, or any kind of klesha motivation, any sense of approaching the Dharma, for instance, in an aggressive way, where it turns into judgmentalness about others, as opposed to a more compassionate attitude toward others. or with any attempt to relate to the Dharma through the klesha of passion, attachment, and to, for instance, try to manipulate or take in others, not for their benefit, but for ours. That would be a pot with poison in it. So we hear the teachings, but we don't really apply them in any positive way. And he says instead of these things, instead of being an upside down pot or a pot with a hole in it or a poison pot, that we should instead listen intently, present in body, speech, and mind. We should retain the meaning and put it into practice. So to do that, we have to remember what we hear, and we have to make some kind of connection with it. We have to reflect upon it, think about it. And he says along with this that it's important to be free of pride and contempt, to abandon all bad thoughts, any klesha, any thoughts that arise out of klesha activity, and not to criticize or abuse spiritual companions. The next set that he talks about, and again, this is all under conduct, what to avoid and what to do. And again, I think that how this can be helpful to us again is if we come to recognize the ways in which in the present moment we may have given in to any one of these things. And the idea is if we recognize, then we can let go. If we stay lost in it, then we won't let go because we won't recognize there's a problem to begin with. Anyway, the 6 stains begin, the first one is pride and jealousy, which Patrul Rinpoche says is most difficult to recognize. So, he says, examine mind minutely for anything you feel is special about your own qualities, because that will blind you to your own faults and make you unaware of the good qualities of others. So again, minutely examine mind minutely, recognize what's in our mind. And this is why, just to make umpteenth plug, why meditation practice is so important. It's only by settling our mind and slowing down and paying attention to our experience in the present that we can do this kind of examination, where we can actually see what's in our mind instead of just being driven by it without, in a mindless way. Not having faith in the Dharma blocks the entrance to the Dharma. That's the second stain. And the way that we develop faith, it's not, basically is by engaging with the Dharma, engaging with meditation practice, and see what works and see what makes sense. And as we do this, as we become more and more as we find through meditation practice that we can work with our minds and we begin to see more about how we are. And I'm thinking about also people who are new to practice, when they begin talking about what difference meditation makes, how they feel that they're calmer, they're less reactive, that they begin to recognize or realize things about themselves that they didn't pay attention before. That's how we develop faith in the Dharma. It's not faith in the sense of adhering to a policy or any set of ideas, but again, actually working with our experience. The third, lack of effort, that's the third stain. He says really depends on our level of interest. And basically, if we have the greater our degree of interest, the greater the result, and the greater our effort. And he describes the great difficulties the Buddha overcame in his practice of Dharma. So the point is that we should listen with great interest. We should really lean into the Dharma, especially again as we develop faith, that it actually is meaningful to us, that it actually is helpful to us, that it actually does make a difference in our lives. The fourth is outward distraction. And I actually like a couple of his sentences here, so I'll read them directly. This refers to the tendency of consciousness to get engrossed in the objects of the 6 senses, which is the root of all samsara's hallucinations and is the source of all suffering. And then he gives 5 examples of different ways in which different beings misperceive sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, and find themselves suffering. So the example, for instance, is that a moth dies in a candle flame because of its attraction to forms, attraction to particular forms, and that the stag is attracted to the sound of the hunter and then falls prey to the hunter, the fish to the taste of the bait, and so on. So it's an interesting thing to think about how sense perceptions can distract us. Now, the interesting thing is any sense perception can actually also wake us up. So it's again, it's that hallucinatory quality that we imagine it to be something that it isn't. That the fish doesn't recognize the bait as a trap, and a very painful trap at that. The moth doesn't recognize the flame as a danger. They just sees it as attraction. And I think, like, certainly if I think of my life, there are different ways in which I get caught in sense perceptions in that way and mistake them for meaning something that they don't. And that's the question, again, to ask ourselves. What do we get stuck on? What do we get attracted to that in the end brings us suffering, just as Patrul Rinpoche says. And he then says, in the same way, whenever we're listening to the Dharma, whenever we're teaching, so this would be me right now, whenever we're meditating or practicing the Dharma, it's important not to follow tendencies from the past, not to entertain emotions from about the future, and not to let your present thoughts get distracted by anything around you. So you could think of those three in particular: not following tendencies of the past, not entertaining emotions of the future, and not letting present thoughts distract us, as how mind consciousness in particular, follows a perception and gets lost, just like the moth flying into a candle flame. And if we're able to let go of that, then we can just be mindful and listen to the Dharma with attention and care. The fifth stain that he talks about is inward tension. And the key idea here is keeping a balance of tight and loose, which is a metaphor that I think people are perhaps familiar with from meditation instruction. It's a pretty common way of talking about how we maintain some kind of balance or equanimity in meditation practice. And the traditional story is that the Buddha was giving instruction to a musician who was having trouble developing resting in his meditation practice, resting in awareness. And the Buddha asked him about how he would tune his instrument. And the musician said, well, if I make the string too tight, it breaks. And if I make it too loose, then the sound isn't good. So I guess it should be not too tight and not too loose. And the Buddha said, yes, that's exactly how meditation practice should be. So the point here is that we don't want to focus so intently that we get caught on particular points, particular words and points, and forget not able to hear the whole. We don't get caught up in any one thing. We don't want to get caught up in too much effortful concentration, which just makes us tired. That instead we want to be firmly concentrated yet loosely relaxed. That's the quotation from Machi Globdron, who was a great woman practitioner. Firmly concentrated, so present, but at the same time relaxed. That we don't want to let mind get too tense or inwardly concentrated, let our senses be naturally at ease. So we want to avoid the stain of inward tension. Too much effort, too much of a goal focus, too much concentration without some relaxation and loosening up and opening up. And then the last is getting discouraged from hearing the teachings. And his point here is that we could never tire. We could get to a point of never tiring of hearing the teachings, that we could appreciate the great opportunity that we have and listen with joy. I think this will become even more evident when John talks about the 4 reminders. Then he talks about the 5 wrong ways of remembering. And here again, it really comes down to a matter of some kind of balance, or I think there's another word, but I can't quite come up with it right now. Some sort of balance between paying attention to the words and paying attention to the meaning. So he says, avoid remembering the words but forgetting the meaning. So you don't want to get so caught up in the language that we don't grasp the meaning of what's being presented to us. But at the same time, we also want to avoid remembering the meaning but forgetting the words, that the words are helpful to us as pointers and reminders. And that words, that we need words to be able to express the meaning, and to be able to recollect the meaning for ourselves. At the same time, words are of no benefit, but we want to keep the connect. Words alone are of no benefit. It's the meaning that's ultimately important. But then at the same time, the words point to the meaning, so they're helpful to us in that way. So again, some kind of balance, not going too far to one extreme or the other. He also says to avoid remembering both, but with no understanding for obvious reasons. That's again like a pot with a hole in it. He also talks about the importance of remembering the words in order. That we want to avoid remembering them out of order or remembering them incorrectly. And with this, he relates to something else that we did talk about last week, that the great variety of teachings that the Buddha and subsequent teachers have presented, where there are some teachings that are provisional or what's called indicative. Those are teachings that are where things are presented in a way that they're understandable to beings. And then there are teachings that are definitive, teachings that indicate the greater reality, the true meaning of things, and that we want to be very clear on what level of teaching we're working with and what order the teachings. For instance, the paramitas, which is the next thing we'll be talking about, we will be talking about the paramitas very briefly, are typically presented in a certain order because they're easier to understand that way and to develop in that way. So it's being clear when we memorize. Being clear about the words, clear about the meaning, clear about the order, and clear about the different levels of teaching. Otherwise, it's easy to feel that things are contradictory when they're really not, because they're ultimately pointing to the same thing. Then there are 4 metaphors. This is again another way in which we could approach hearing the teachings. Another way in which we can develop appreciation and faith in the teachings, in the power of the teachings. So the 4 metaphors are, first of all, seeing the self as sick, basically. Sick with, as he says, sick with the diseases of karma, negative emotions, and suffering. To see the teacher or the guru, the spiritual friend, as like a doctor. To see diligent practice as the way to recovery. And to see the Dharma as cure, the teaching of the Dharma as cure. So the point here is to have some understanding of how it is that we suffer, how it is that we're stuck, what it is that we need to work with and why, and how the Dharma presents the cure as well as the diagnosis, and that the teacher presents the way to work with ourselves, which is essentially through meditation practice, as well as through the teachings. And that as diligent practice is the way to recovery. And here again, I just want to read. There's some different things that Patrul Rinpoche presents here, and basically it talks about the belief that someone could just get a simple empowerment of some kind, and then, as he says, those who conduct village ceremonies will have you believe that on your deathbed you can still go up and down as if you were steering a horse by the reins. But by that time, unless you have already mastered the path, the fierce wind of your past actions will be chasing after you, while in front, a terrifying black darkness rushes towards you as you are driven helplessly down the long and perilous path of the intermediate state. The Lord of Death's countless henchmen will be pursuing you, crying, "Kill, kill, strike, strike." How could such a moment, when there is no place to run to and nowhere to hide, no refuge and no hope, when you are desperate and have no idea what to do, how could such a moment be the turning point at which you control whether you go up or down? And then just a few sentences later, he makes the point that I think is one of the key points about our entire approach here. In fact, the turning point, the only time that you can really direct yourself up or down, as if steering a horse with reins, is right now, while you're still alive. So again, just really driving home the importance of practice, the importance of of studying the Dharma, especially once we begin to develop faith that it makes sense to us, that it works for us, that it makes a difference in our lives, and to really appreciate the Dharma as a cure for the diseases that affect us. The last thing that he talks about are the six transcendent perfections, and these again relate to the, six transcendent perfections is another word for the paramitas, transcendent action. And so basically with generosity, that there's a making of offerings. This is again how to hear the teachings, and in particular, I think with a guru or a Vajra master, make offerings of some kind, that we have a place in order and we control our behavior, which relates to discipline, the second paramita, that we don't harm any living being, which is patience, absence of aggression, harm, any kind of aggressive intent, that we lay aside wrong views about the teacher and Dharma and listen joyfully with genuine faith. So joyful, diligent action is the fourth paramita, exertion. That we listen to the instruction without distraction, and that's the fifth paramita, meditation. And that finally, with prajna or wisdom, that we ask questions to clear up hesitation and doubts, that we don't hesitate to ask questions when something's unclear, or when we have something's not is confusing to us, or there's any kind of hesitation, that we don't hold back, that we actually work to develop our understanding of the Dharma, because that's ultimately what frees us. So that's how we should listen to the Dharma. It's quite a bit, but again, I think really what it comes down to is, for myself and for all of us, is to ask ourselves, which of all these things ring true? Which of these things seem to apply to me? And again, it's not, it's how we're feeling, how we're approaching things right now as we listen to the teachings. So with that, I'll turn it over to John, and we'll hear about the 4 reminders, the 4 thoughts to turn our mind to the Dharma.
Thank you, Michael. Let me see what I'm doing here with the view. Hello, hello. Well, okay. Now we'll see if I can, this is for the recording. Oh. Okay. I just wanted to point out this whole book is so rich. You can't cover everything in a lecture like this. There are some points, just a couple of points that I wanted to bring out that Michael passed by. One is the 3 supreme methods that he invokes, he asks us to practice whenever we practice. And the first is to arouse bodhicitta, the intention to be of benefit to all sentient beings. And that this is necessary whenever you practice, whenever you do anything significant. The second is to bring your mind into non-conceptual awareness. When you practice, when you're waking up in the middle of the day, when you're waking up as you're doing your meditation in action, you bring your mind into pure, clear, non-conceptual awareness. That's the second supreme method. And the third supreme method is to dedicate the merit, to give it away to all sentient beings. And we do all these every day when we practice, and it's just a good point. I also wanted to read a quote that he used from a teacher that I'm not familiar with named Gyaltse Rinpoche. I think this book is one of the main features is that it's bringing forward the immediacy of our situation. The fact that we tend to get lost in the concerns and worries and hopes and fears and pleasures of everyday life, and our life is flying by. There are many in this room, this meeting, who are over 60 and quite a few who are over 70, and we all know people who have died or are dying. Our lives are very transient. And we have this rare opportunity to achieve enlightenment. And he's urging us, take advantage of it. Don't get caught up in the mundanities of daily concerns, of what's for dinner, let's see the movie, whatever it might be, and practice. Practice the path. And to that end, he quotes this teacher who says, your past joys and sorrows are like drawings on water. Aren't they? Isn't that the case? Where are they? They fly away. The past is gone. You can barely remember what happened yesterday, much less last year. No trace of them remains. Don't run after them. They're like drawings on water. But should they come to mind, reflect on how success and failure come and go. Is there anything you can trust beside the Dharma, Mani reciters? What he's talking about is Mani reciters is Om Mani Padme Hum. And people would recite it sort of by rote. And he's mocking them, these people who do this and think that they're doing something holy, reciting this by rote. Your future projects and plans are like nets cast in a dry riverbed. They'll never bring you what you want. Limit your desires and aspirations, but should they come to mind, think how uncertain it is when you'll die. You have got time for anything other than have you got time for anything other than the Dharma, Mani reciters? This is the whole theme of this book, really. Your present work is like a job in a dream. Since all effort is pointless, cast it aside. Consider even your honest earnings without any attachment. Activities are without essence, Mani reciters. Between meditation sessions, learn to control in this way all thoughts arising from the three poisons, aggression, passion, and indifference. Until all thoughts and perceptions arise as the Dharmakaya, meaning non-existent, just arising and passing away in the instant. This is indispensable, remembering it whenever you need it. Do not give rein to deluded thoughts, Mani reciters. So this whole book is a fierce injunction for us to partake this tremendously precious opportunity that we have, this one life, which flies by. It's just a minute ago that I stepped foot on the path and I was 25. Just goes like that. To take advantage of it, to tread the path, to awaken, to achieve the ultimate good. So, part 2, the teaching itself, an explanation of how difficult it is to find the freedoms and advantages. And I put a list in chat, which you can print out. You can open it up in chat if you go into chat. It's there for you. And I'm going to be continuing to do this because these lists that he references in the text sometimes are hard to remember what they are. And so this you can have, and I'll continue to do this, Michael and I guess, as we go along so that we have these lists to look at. So the main of the subject of this part is explained in 4 sections. The first is reflecting on the nature of freedom. The second is reflecting on the particular advantages related to Dharma. The third is reflecting on images that show how difficult it is to find the freedoms and advantages. And the fourth is reflecting on some numerical comparisons. So freedom here means to have the opportunity to practice the Dharma. Not being born in one of the 8 states without that opportunity. These 8 states are hell realm. If you're born in the hell realm, you can't practice the Dharma. You're just, think of it, especially those of you who live in New York. Haven't you seen people walking down the streets or on the subway who are really crazy and they're shouting and behaving in absolutely inappropriate ways in the hell realm? That's what one version. Beings born in the Preta realm, they're consumed with hunger, with a feeling of inadequacy of their lives, and that their lives are poor and that they have to continually try to feed themselves. Being born an animal, which means slavery and attacks from other animals and human beings, a life of fear and submission. Being born a long-lived god. Now, the gods are the top of the food chain in the realm. There are three realms that you have to be aware of. One is they're called dhatus. There is the kama dhatu, that's the realm of desire. There is the rupa dhatu, which is the realm of form. And there is the arupa dhatu, meaning the formless realm. All of these are confused, samsaric, completely. You'll read versions sometimes on the internet which are more Hindu than they are Buddhist, that say that the upper realms, the realm of pure form and the realm of the formless realm, can lead to enlightenment. No, they cannot. According to Tantric Buddhism, according to Mahayana Buddhism, as it lived in China, Japan, Korea, all these places, no, none of these three realms lead to enlightenment. The Kama Dhatu, the realm of desire, is broken down into the six realms, the six lokas, they're called. And they are from bottom up: hell realm, the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, the human realm in the middle, the realm of the jealous gods. These are people who want to be gods and are like warriors. They're storming the gates of heaven. And the gods. The gods are blissed out not human beings, blissed out beings who are utterly beautiful. They live long lives until suddenly, at the end of a very long life, they realize that they're dying. Their body is corrupting, and they are plunged through disappointment down, perhaps even all the way into hell. Of these six realms, and we'll be reading about them later, the only one in which you can tread the path is the human realm, our realm. We have the right combination of suffering to motivate us and intelligence to be able to tread the path, and enough freedom from neurosis that we can tread the path and wake up. Above the realm of the gods, we get to the realm of pure form, and this is actually mental states that are achieved through concentration on an object. You still the mind and go into trance states. And there are 16 or 18 different trance states in the realm of pure form. And above that is the formless realm, where you meditate on beyond an object. It's not an object. You're meditating on, for instance, you meditate on pure space. You meditate on consciousness. You meditate on not this and not that. And there's a fourth one, I forget. But the idea is that it's a very, very abstract form of trance. And the problem with these states is they're very pleasurable, and you can get stuck in them, and they're a waste of time, a huge waste of time. And when you awaken from them, the disillusionment and the feeling of disappointment can be so great that you can be plunged into a very unpleasant place. So we're very fortunate, all of us, that we have been born in a human body. I mean, our dogs and cats can't practice the Dharma, and jealous gods and pretas and hell beings, they don't have the mindset to be able to do it at all. Only humans can tread the path. So the 5 individual advantages. The first one, born a human. It's necessary to be able to encounter the Dharma. This is called the advantage of support. The second is born in a central place. This means a place where the Dharma is taught and practiced. This is the advantage of place. The Dharma is being taught and practiced now in the United States. Having all one's faculties, without which your practice of the Dharma would be limited. That means, if you can't hear, it's going to be very hard to practice the Dharma. If you can't see, whatever the faculty that you've lost will hinder your ability to practice the Dharma. Without a conflicting lifestyle, A conflicting lifestyle is one that makes it impossible for you to study and practice the Dharma. If you had one, you would be of such a lifestyle, you would be immersed in thoughts and activities counter to the Dharma. You might, for instance, a classic conflicting lifestyle would be to be a criminal and constantly live a life of fear and aggression. That would make it impossible to practice the Dharma properly. And finally, you have to have faith in the Dharma. Without faith, you would have no inclination toward it. But with faith, you can turn your mind to the Dharma. So you have to begin to really believe this. That another thing that he mentions I think in the first part, it's necessary to begin to realize that the true motivation for coming to this path is a revulsion with samsara and confusion. Samsara is confusion. That we begin to realize that it's awful, that we're trapped in our passions and kleshas, and in one degree or another, it might be slight, it might be great, and confusion, that we don't really know anything. We're just sort of blindly sliding along towards our deaths. And one day we'll wake up and we'll be on our deathbeds. So it's very important to develop faith. Faith means that you see the opportunity, that you believe in it. You begin more and more to understand it, the opportunity to wake up from dreams and come present and be here with clarity and compassion for the world. This is, we're being asked to become Buddhas. So a central place is real, where the Dharma is taught and practiced. All other regions are peripheral. In Tibet, the Dharma first appeared in the reign of La Totori Nyensen. He appeared sometime, I'm not quite clear, it's probably the 2nd or 3rd century AD, when a sutra and some other Dharma objects fell on the roof of his palace. And he began to get an idea that there was such a thing as Dharma. 5 generations later, the Dharma king, Songtsen Gampo, he appeared in the 7th century. And he sent his minister. At that time, Tibet had no written language. So Songtsen Gampo sent his minister, Tonmi Sambota, to India to bring back the Sanskrit alphabet. And they did, and they adapted it to the Tibetan language and began to write and to translate Sanskrit texts. It's kind of like, we are using the Latin alphabet to write English words, and you can use the same alphabet to write German or French or Spanish. Well, the Tibetans use the Sanskrit alphabet to write Tibetan. And also, King Songtsen Gampo, he took as queens a Chinese princess and a Nepalese princess, both of whom brought Buddhism along with them. They were both Buddhists. As well as they also brought numerous representations of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, including the 2 Jowo statues that are still there of Sakyamuni Buddha at the age of 12, one of them, and 8, the other, and they're still housed in temples in Lhasa. Songtsen Gampo's 5th successor was the great king Trisong Detsen. He lived in the 700s, and he developed faith in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and he sent to India for a teacher, and the teacher that came was a Mahayana teacher named Shantarakshita. And Shantarakshita made some of his students monks, and they set out to build the first temple in Lhasa. And what they found is that they would build it by day, and by night, the Bun was the native religion of Tibet. Bun demons would tear it down. So Shantarakshita said to Trisong Detsen, the king, you need somebody with more power than I. And there's this fellow in India that you should ask to come. His name is Padmasambhava. And so Trisong Detsen, this great king, who became an enlightened person, by the way, sent to India, and Padmasambhava agreed, and he came. And he defeated the Bun demons, And the first temple was built in Lhasa, and he did many, many things. He became what the Tibetan Buddhists call the second Buddha. He was really after Shakyamuni. Built the first temple in Samye. And he also established the translators. There were supposedly 108. You know, there's always 108 because that's the number of, it's a holy number, the number of beads on your mala, 108 everything. But they included the famous translator Vairochana, who became enlightened as well. And they had the first monks ordained, 7 to form a Sangha. And from that time until now, Buddhism has been central in Tibet, even now. So Tibet is a central country. And you can ask Xin Yi. She has been back to China to visit her mother, who is a Tibetan Buddhist. And they have traveled to what used to be Tibet, now as part of communist China, the eastern part of Tibet. And it's alive and well in temples and monasteries there. And they have gone there and practiced. So one needs all one's sense faculties to practice the Dharma. Having a conflicting lifestyle refers to criminals, hunters, cheats, and anyone whose every thought, word, and deed is contrary to the Dharma. If your faith is not in the Buddhist teachings, but in other things, gods, spirits, wealth, achievement, career, being praised, you are not protected from the sufferings of samsara or birth in the lower realms. Having a properly reasoned faith in the Dharma is the greatest of the 5 individual advantages. So then we go into the 5, these are the 5 individual advantages, just to repeat. 1 is being born a human. 2 is born in a central place where the Dharma is taught and practiced. 3 is having all one's faculties, without which your practice of the Dharma would be limited. 4 is without a conflicting lifestyle, like being a hunter or a criminal or a cheat. And 5 is having faith in the Dharma, because without faith, nothing happens. Without confidence and seeing the potential. And then there are the 5 circumstantial advantages. The presence in our kalpa. That means a kalpa is an age that begins when a universe is born and ends when a universe dies. Long time. There are thousands, tens of thousands, millions of kalpas throughout time. So the circumstantial advantage is that we have to have in our kalpa the presence of a teacher. It might be the Dalai Lama, it might be Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, it might be, and then there are 3 levels of teachers that I want to alert you to. It's not covered in this. The first level is the Hinayana teacher. And a Hinayana teacher is a preceptor. He gives you the information, he gives you the Hinayana teachings, and he sets an example by his behavior, his or hers. The second level of teacher is a Mahayana teacher. A Mahayana teacher is one who has begun to connect to emptiness and compassion, and is on the bhumis, perhaps. And actually, the name for a Mahayana teacher in this sense is they call it a spiritual friend, Kalyana Mitra. And a Mahayana teacher is more on the level, on your level. They speak, a preceptor sits above you. And it's not that they're so superior, it's just that they are teaching you information. Whereas a Mahayana teacher is more like a deep friendship. Perhaps you've encountered some. I had a Mahayana teacher that I regarded as my Kalyana Mitra. His name was Kobanchino Sensei, Japanese, Soto Zen. And he was a beautiful person. And then the third level of a teacher is a Vajra master. This is a person who perhaps has achieved enlightenment, but certainly has tremendous insight and is operating on the Vajrayana level, which can be very fierce. So, the 5 circumstantial advantages. First is presence in our kalpa of a particular teacher, someone to bring you the Dharma. The Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, so we have the teaching of the Dharma. That's the second circumstantial advantage. The third is his teaching has not died out but remains, so we have the advantage of time. The fourth is since we are studying the Dharma, we have the advantage of our own good fortune, that we have encountered this. And the fifth is we have been accepted by a spiritual friend. We have the advantage of compassion. And that permeates this whole situation that we're all in. This quality of compassion, openness, heart, the Dharma, friendship, helping each other. Because these need to be complete with circumstances other than one's own, they are called the 5 circumstantial advantages. And here it is, just the definition I wrote in here of a kalpa. The time it takes the universe to form, stay in existence, and be destroyed, and to remain in a state of emptiness, is called a kalpa. A kalpa in which a perfect Buddha appears in the world is called a bright kalpa. So our kalpa, while one in which a Buddha does not appear, it is called a dark kalpa. We are in a bright kalpa because Shakyamuni appeared. And then I have a note to read the second to the last paragraph on page 25 about this. I think we can skip this. You can read it. It's on page 25, the second to the last paragraph is, again, it goes into even more about a kalpa. It says, long ago during the great kalpa of manifest joy, 33,000 Buddhas appeared. That's not trivial, is it? 100 dark kalpas followed. Dark kalpas, no Buddhas. Then during the perfect kalpa, 800 million Buddhas appeared, again followed by 100 kalpas without Dharma. Then 840 million Buddhas appeared during the excellent kalpa, after which there were 500 dark kalpas. During the kalpa delightful to see, 800 million Buddhas appeared, and then there were 700 kalpas of darkness. 60,000 Buddhas appeared during the joyous kalpa. Then came our own kalpa, the good kalpa. So, I think what this is trying to do is to wake us up to the extraordinary situation that one always finds oneself in. Again, I just enjoin you to consider how fast our lives are flying by. How a minute ago, 30 years have passed. It just goes in a finger snap. Okay. So when the Buddha first attained enlightenment, he felt unable to teach it until Brahma and Indra begged him to turn the wheel of the Dharma, their god, the Hindu gods, which he did on 3 levels, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and led disciples through the 9 vehicles. These are the 9 yanas of Nyingma Buddhism. And the last one is Dzogchen, great perfection, and so forth. According to their needs and capabilities, to maturity and liberation. There are periods between one Buddha's teaching and another that are devoid of Dharma, though this has not happened for us. We still have the teachings in a 10-fold sequence. It gives this sequence of 3 periods, 3 periods, 3 periods, and finally 1 period, each of these having 500 parts or 500 years. We live in an age of increase in the 5 degenerations. The 5 degenerations are lifespan. Lives are getting shorter according to this teaching. Beliefs, emotions, time, and beings. We still do have the advantage of possessing the complete Dharma, its transmission and realization. But you have to drink the water, see the light. In other words, if you don't study and practice the Dharma, it's moot. There's Dharma as protection against fears of the lower realms and other negativities, and this isn't a proper way to set out on the path. To enter the Dharma understanding that the whole of samsara, confusion, being unenlightened, believing in a self and other, has no meaning, striving to find a way to be free from it, is called taking up the teaching by arriving at the starting point of the path. This is or developing a revulsion with samsara, with confusion, with the suffering, with confusion of believing I and other. This is absolutely necessary. Even if you start practicing the Dharma, unless you have been accepted by a spiritual friend, it will be of no use. Whoops, how are we doing on time? Okay. It will be of no use unless you've been accepted by a spiritual friend. And we are all accepted by a spiritual friend. This is the tradition that we're in. Michael and I are the voice of this, but it's here. It's coming from Trungpa Rinpoche, from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, from His Holiness the Karmapa, and other teachers who have come to teach us. Jowo Atisha, the great teacher Atisha that Michael mentioned before, told his disciples, unless you're determined to free yourself from the three worlds of samsara, how to dedicate the merit to perfect enlightenment, unless your minds are turned away from the 8 ordinary concerns, those are gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and criticism, fame and infamy. They're listed on that sheet that I put in there for you to print out in chat. Whatever you do will only be for this present life, and you will not encounter the path that helps for future lives. This illustrates how important it is to be taken under the care of a teacher, a spiritual friend. And I encourage everyone here to study with other teachers and find ones that speak to you as well as this situation. I do. Michael does. Michael's going off to study with Prologue Rinpoche. I study with a man currently, since Trungpa Rinpoche is dead, whose name is Khenpo Namdrol. Both of them are marvelous teachers. The human life endowed with 8 freedoms from the realms, and all that, and the 10 advantages which we've gone through. It says, however, the omniscient Dharma King Longchenpa, in his wish-granting treasury. Now, Longchenpa had 7 treasuries. They are really ultimate teachings. One of them is called the wish-granting treasury. He specifies 16 additional conditions which preclude any opportunity to practice the Dharma. Things like, I'm not going to go through them all, but turmoil from the 5 emotions, stupidity, laziness, being overcome by the effects of past evil actions, perhaps you committed a crime of some sort, enslavement to others, hypocritical practice, and more. And then there are 8 incompatible propensities that separate one's mind from liberation. Flagrant depravity, lack of dissatisfaction with samsara, that you don't care, you don't mind samsara, complete absence of faith, and you don't have faith in the Dharma and the ability of this to open yourself up and free you, taking pleasure in bad action, lack of interest in the Dharma, heedlessness of the vows. That means you're going to break your vows. You take some vows. Whenever you receive an abhisheka, starting with refuge, you're taking vows, and it'll continue all the way up into the Vajrayana, where these vows are called samayas, and breaking them is very bad. Then there are the 8 intrusive circumstances that leave no freedom to practice the Dharma. 1, people in whom the 5 poisons, the negative emotions such as hatred for enemies, infatuation with friends and relatives, in which these are extremely strong, may wish from time to time that they could practice the Dharma, but the 5 poisons are too strong. Very stupid beings can't, can't understand the Dharma. People taken as disciples by a false spiritual friend who leads their minds falsely, and this happens. I've seen it happen over the years. People who are too lazy, even though they may want to practice the Dharma. People overcome by their obscurations and negative actions, just consumed by these things. People in servitude to someone else who've lost their autonomy, so they're not allowed to practice the Dharma. Those who take up the Dharma out of fear for this present life because they feel that it's going to bring them food, money. Imposters who are really only interested in the things of this life, and they are around. And then there are the 8 incompatible propensities that leave no room to practice the Dharma. People who are tightly bound to their worldly commitments, people who lack any scrap of humanity who are depraved. Perhaps you've met people like that from time to time. And so on. People who having no faith in the Dharma or the teacher. People who take pleasure in harmful or negative actions and who fail to control their thoughts, words, or deeds are devoid of any noble qualities. Well, I can think of people like this, and I don't want to mention this in a public place, but I think we're all familiar with it because of politics attracts people who are egotists. People who are no more interested in spiritual values and the Dharma than a dog in eating grass. No enthusiasm for it. These are people who have no freedom to practice the Dharma. Anyone who, having entered the Mahayana, breaks his or her vows and commitment to the bodhicitta has nowhere else to go but to the lower realms. And what it means is that anyone who breaks their commitment to being kind and of help to others will go to the lower realms. Anyone who, having entered the secret mantra vehicle, that's the Vajrayana, breaks his or her samaya commitments to the teacher and spiritual brothers and sisters. So, before blindly assuming the forms of the Dharma, check your own state carefully. First, to see whether or not you have all the 34 aspects of the freedoms and advantages. And if you have them all, rejoice and reflect deeply on them over and over again. If you find some missing, try hard to acquire them. And I've given you the lists of these, and they're here in the text. At all times, you should take pains to examine carefully whether or not you have all the elements of the freedoms and advantages. If you have them, rejoice. So, to have all 10 advantages is even rarer than having all 8 freedoms. All right. Part 3 of this is reflecting on images that show how difficult it is to find the freedoms and advantages. And these are just a couple of metaphors. It's more difficult to be born a human than for a blind turtle. This is classic. For a blind turtle that comes up from air from the depths of the ocean every 100 years to put its head by chance through the opening of a wooden yoke floating on the surface. That's how likely it is for us to be reborn as human beings. This blind turtle every 100 years comes up for air, and it by chance puts its head through the yoke of through the hole of a wooden yoke, for oxen, that's floating on the surface of the ocean. That's their chance of being born a human being. And he says Nagarjuna and Shantideva concur on this. And then another metaphor, how hard it is to have the freedoms and advantages to practice the path. As hard as getting dried peas thrown at a wall to stick to it, or to balance a pile of peas on an upright needle. That's how hard it is. And then to be born a god or a human is very rare compared to hell beings, pretas, animals, and so forth. And just consider, there are 8 billion human beings on the planet. How many insects are there? They're sentient beings too, going through birth, death, and rebirth. And eventually they'll become human beings, hopefully, at some point. So how many sentient beings are there? So to be born a human is very rare. Even rarer to be born a human with the freedoms and advantages that enable us to practice the Dharma, to see its necessity, to see the opportunity. A human life can be called a precious human life only when it is complete with all aspects of freedoms and advantages. Without any one of the freedoms and advantages, you only have what is called an ordinary human life, merely human life, hapless human life, or human life returning empty-handed. He says, it is like failing to use a wish-fulfilling gem despite holding it in your hands, or returning empty-handed from a land full of precious gold. I have a note to myself to read this verse. To come across a precious jewel is nothing compared to finding this precious human life. Look how those who are not saddened by samsara fritter life away. And haven't we all done this so much? To win a whole kingdom is nothing compared to meeting a perfect teacher. Look how those with no devotion treat the teacher as their equal. To be given command of a province is nothing compared to receiving the bodhisattva vows. Look how those with no compassion hurl their vows away. To rule over the universe is nothing compared to receiving a tantric empowerment. Look how those who do not keep the samayas jettison their promises. To catch sight of the Buddha is nothing compared to seeing the true nature of mind. Look how those with no determination sink back into delusion. These freedoms and advantages don't come by chance or coincidence. They are the result of the accumulation of merit and wisdom built up over many kalpas. So you have been practicing in one way or another for long periods of time, building up merit. Merit is the inclination to be of benefit to others and yourself, and wisdom, which is the ability to see through the preconceptions of I and other, good and bad, hope and fear. Begin to see things as they are. With all these perspectives in mind, you should be filled with joy that you really have all the freedoms and advantages complete. A human life can be called a precious human life only when it is complete with all aspects of freedoms and advantages. Okay. Used well, this body is our raft to freedom. Used badly, this body anchors us to samsara. This body does the bidding of both good and evil. It is through the power of all the merit you have accumulated in the past by doing good deeds, being kind to other people, other sentient beings, animals, that you have now obtained this human life, complete with the 18 freedoms and advantages. To neglect the one essential thing, the supreme Dharma, and instead just spend your life acquiring food and clothes and indulging in the 8 ordinary concerns would be a useless waste of those freedoms and advantages. How ineffectual to wait until death is upon you and then beat your breast with remorse, for you will have made the wrong choice. And I think of Val, who's doing so many sukhavati's, that means funerals, at the Shambhala Center here. People are dying, and when you get to this age, 60 and above, but especially past 70, people start dying all around you. This present life, therefore, is the turning point at which you can choose between lasting good or lasting evil. If you do not make use of it right now to seize the citadel of the absolute nature within this lifetime, In lives to come, it will be very hard to obtain such freedom again. Once you take birth in any of the forms of life in the lower realms, no idea of the Dharma will occur to you. Too bewildered to know what to do, what to not to do, you will fall endlessly further and further to ever lower realms. So telling yourself that now is the time to make an effort, meditate over and over again, applying the supreme methods. Remember, generating bodhicitta, meditating without concept, and dedicating the merit, those three supreme methods. And then finally this verse, although I have won these freedoms, I am poor in the Dharma, which is their essence. Although I have entered the Dharma, I waste my time doing other things. Bless me and foolish beings like me, that we may attain the very essence of freedoms and advantages. So we can have a discussion for a few minutes and then again tomorrow night. My hope is that you will feel as blessed and inspired by Patrul Rinpoche. What a gift he's giving us. Mark.
Hi, everybody. Michael. I just, all this talk about sentient, everything being sentient, and well, the other thing was the middle way, but I discussed. But do you have to be a vegetarian in this on our path, or I mean, how do we get a pass on that?
I don't know. I mean, Trungpa Rinpoche, Tibetans, it was very difficult for Tibetans to be vegetarians. They're living at 12,000 feet and higher. And, meat's not common in short supply. Although, meat is common and, not in short supply, and hard to grow vegetables and climate and what you need. So when he came here, he didn't want us to go on any trips. He used to say that over and over, and please don't go on any trips. I remember putting him on an airplane once, and as he was about to go down the gangway to the plane, he turned around and looked at us all and said, "Have a nice trip." So he was always enjoining us not to go on any trips, and there was very little vegetarianism because of the idea of being holy. It was frowned on. But I've gotten to the point where I'm very chary of killing flies, mosquitoes, that kind of thing. I'd rather put them in a glass and throw them out the window to live out there. But then there are mice, moles. We take our chances.
Also, the reference to about the strings being too tight or too loose, is that kind of a reference to the middle way and how it permeates our all the teachings and the Dharma and the path?
I don't know. I think it's more, Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, a reference to how you handle your mind.
Mm-hmm.
You're bear down on it really hard, and you don't utterly, give it free rein, not too tight, not too loose, when you're meditating, which was the context of that conversation that the person was having with the Buddha. Yeah?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's the other term, middle way, really refers to the Madhyamaka, and middle way between the extremes of eternalism and nihilism. So with not too tight, not too loose is more about maintaining so awareness, so that you know if you're too much effort, too much concentration, or not coming back, too much wildness, and that that there's something in between. There's another metaphor that's sometimes used, like a Brahmin spinning thread, which I've never seen, but I guess it probably was meaningful at some point in history. But the idea that it's the same thing, that if you try too hard when you're spinning a thread, it doesn't work well, it gets tangled up, and if it's too loose, it's not effective as a thread. It's the same idea, how to work with mind.
Hmm.
Not too tight, not too loose.
Thank you.
What do you think of this? I mean, this is a very different style of anything that we have read, to say the least. Patrol Rinpoche is pretty fierce. Inspirations, difficulties, criticisms.
I'll say it's nicer doing, or it's easier to understand and less totally scary doing it together in group. A friend of mine had given me Kunzeng Lame Jalong, which is like a lot of the words. It was interesting hearing Michael, and I don't have the copy you guys are working from right now. I'll get it. I've been using this guide to the words. But how words sort of point us towards things, and this version's hardcore, and a lot of the language is old, and it's very like, you're not going to get it, and you're going to go down, and you feel like, oh, I'm messing up in every moment all the time. So it's also just nice to hear you guys talk it through and ground it in all of Trungpa's writings that we'd been through over these few years. So I'm enjoying this.
So that version that you have, it must be a different translation.
Yeah, it's Mr. Kazi, and
Okay.
it's old. It's old,
You
and
hold, could you hold it up again? Oh yeah.
Kunzang Lame Shelung means words of my perfect teacher.
And when, as you're going through some of those lists, it's more accurate. It's closer to your translation in this book than this version, which aims to sort of be the guide to this. But I want to like go back and give an example of motivation and conduct. I'm also aware that we're at time. It's like, yeah, defilements, those kinds of words that make things sound more scary.
Mm-hmm. Also, but just as we're about to leave, I want to recommend highly that you read the numbered footnotes. I keep a bookmark in the numbered pages back here so that I can flip to them easily. There are some terrific footnotes there. There's some things that you won't be interested in, obviously, but a lot of them are really good. I feel like it's a real richness that the Panmakar translation group brings to this translation. So we should close.
Okay.
Michael, are you putting the closing chants up?
Yeah.
Okay. And see you all tomorrow, I hope, to discuss this. Michael, I'll mute all.
Yep.
You unmute yourself.
So we'll close with a prayer for peace and dedicating the merit generated through our practice, just as we were enjoined to do by Patrol Rinpoche, for the benefit of all sentient beings. by the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the region's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. John,
Thanks,
see you next
everybody.
time.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Michael. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Bye,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right.